Hello, I'm Tom Harbin in Washington, D.C., and here's what's coming up tonight on The Big Picture. Shortly after an earthquake and tsunami triggered a nuclear catastrophe at the Fukushima plant in Japan back in March, I sat down with nuclear physicist Michio Kaku as part of our Conversations with Great Minds to talk about the consequences of what was unfolding in Japan and the dangers of nuclear energy. As we know today, 5 months removed from the quake and tsunami, Japan is still dealing with the nuclear nightmare. That's why tonight we'll revisit my conversation with Michio and re-examine the ongoing nuclear scenario on the other side of the planet. For tonight's Conversations with the Great Minds, I'm joined by a brilliant physicist, New York Times best-selling author, a man who can explain the most complex scientific problems in ways the rest of us can understand. Not only is he a professor of theoretical physics at the City University of New York, but he's also the host of the TV show Sci-Fi Science, Physics of the Impossible on the Science Channel, as well as the host of 2 radio programs broadcast on over 140 stations. His current work is focused on finishing Einstein's project of creating a unified theory to explain how everything works in the universe. And he is the co-founder of something called string field theory, which we'll get into later. His latest book is called Physics of the Future, How Science Will Shape Human Destiny and Our Daily Lives by the Year 2100. Pleased to welcome from Los Angeles a man on the cutting edge of science, Dr. Michio Kaku. Dr. Kaku, welcome.
Glad to be on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very glad to have you with us. I understand that when you were 8 years old, you had an epiphany that started you on this path.
That's right. Some people remember the instant that Princess Diana died. I remember the instant when Albert Einstein died. It was in all the newspapers. Everyone was talking about the fact that he could not finish his greatest work. It was to be the theory of everything, an equation 1 inch long, which would allow us to, quote, read the mind of God. One theory which would describe everything from the Big Bang, formation of the stars, the galaxy, people, maybe even love. And I said to myself, that's for me. That's what I want to finish, the unified field theory.
And with string theory, my recollection, it's been some years, but my recollection is that the original objection or problem with it was that it required a 10-dimensional multiverse or universe. If you can translate that into English and tell us how you've solved that or how close you may be to that, I'm fascinated by it. I'm curious.
String theory, we think, is it. It is the leading and only candidate for a theory of everything. It says that everything we see around us is nothing but little tiny vibrating rubber bands. And when they vibrate in one mode, it's an electron. When you twang it and it vibrates in another mode, it turns into a neutrino or a quark or any of the thousands of subatomic particles we see. So physics is nothing but the harmonies you can write on these tiny vibrating rubber bands. Chemistry is nothing but the melodies you can play on these interacting strings. The universe is a symphony of strings. And the mind of God that Albert Einstein wrote about would be cosmic music. Cosmic music resonating through 10, maybe 11-dimensional hyperspace. So you can imagine how controversial it is. People were saying, this is Star Trek, a multiverse of universe. That's right. And now we have the Large Hadron Collider outside Geneva, Switzerland, that hopefully will test this theory. Maybe there are other universes and other dimensions.
Maybe. A friend of mine who started out in physics and ended up in metaphysics suggested that matter essentially, that as Einstein, equals mc squared, that the amount of energy in matter is just the speed of light squared, and times the mass, and that if you could then define that energy and look at the most subtle particle of energy, that at that level the universe would be solid, or at least would be filled, and that most subtle energy might be something that we could describe as love or consciousness. You used the word love just a moment ago. Is that anything close to what you were talking about?
Well, in the sense that we think the tiniest bit of space-time, the tiniest bit of matter, is described by vibrating strings. Strings make music, and the music of these strings is the epiphany of the realization that all the particles we see in nature are nothing but different notes on a vibrating string. Now, the picture coming out of string theory, you mentioned the multiverse. That picture is that we have a bubble. We live on the skin of this bubble, said Einstein, and the bubble is expanding. That's the Big Bang Theory.
Sure.
But the new wrinkle in all this is that we think there are other bubbles out there. Other bubbles. And when these bubbles collide, they form larger bubbles. That's called the big splat theory. Or these bubbles can pinch off. So we have a bubble bath of universes, and that, we think, is where the Big Bang came from. The Big Bang came from, we think, bubbles colliding with other bubbles, bubbles fissioning in half, just like what you see in a bubble bath. That is the multiverse of universes.
We started out by your epiphany at the age of 8. I understand also as a child you wanted to build a particle accelerator in your parents' garage, and that your parents had been interned in the concentration camps that President Roosevelt had put together during World War II. How has all of that shaped your worldview?
Yeah, it's true. My parents were in a relocation camp from 1942 to 1946. But I was in the Sputnik age, the age when people said, yes, it's your duty to become a scientist. And I was swept up by all that. So when I was in high school, I built an atom smasher, a 2.3 million electron volt betatron accelerator that I built in my mom's garage. So one day I asked my mom, Mom, can I have permission to build an atom smasher in the garage? And she said, sure, why not? And don't forget to take out the garbage. Well, it weighed 400 pounds. It contained 22 miles of copper wire. It consumed 6 kilowatts of power. Every time I turned it on, I blew out every single circuit breaker in the house. And my poor mom, every time the lights went out, she would say, where's the fuse box? And then she would say, why couldn't I have a son who plays basketball, maybe baseball? And for God's sake, why can't he find a nice Japanese girlfriend? Well, hey, I can't complain because the accelerator got me into Harvard. In fact, when I was in high school, my atom smasher earned the attention of an atomic physicist called Edward Teller. He's the father of the hydrogen bomb. He took me under his wing, and he arranged for me to get a scholarship to Harvard. And that set me off chasing after Einstein's theory of everything.
You talk about how politics is important. In fact, in your new book, Physics of the Future, there's a actually there's a whole bunch of things in here I'd love to talk to you about. But just in general, and I know I've heard you tell this story before about explaining physics to politicians in the context of religion. Can you share that story with us, and why, in your mind, politics, as a theoretical physicist, politics is important?
Well, in 1993, we were going to build the largest particle accelerator, the largest atom smasher of all time, much bigger than the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland, which is actually a pea shooter. The big one was called the Super Collider. It was to be built outside Dallas, Texas, costing $11 billion. But then in the last day of hearings, because of cost overruns, one congressman said, now, wait a minute. Will we find God with your machine? If so, then I'll vote for it. Well, the poor physicist didn't know what to say. Are we going to find God with the Super Collider? So he said, we're going to find the Higgs boson. Well, you could hear the jaws hit the floor of the United States Congress. $11 billion for another god-darn subatomic particle? They took the vote, and the machine was canceled. So ever since then, we physicists have been asking the question, how should we have answered that question? Will we find God with your machine? I would have answered it differently. I would have said, God, by whatever signs or symbols you ascribe to the deity. This machine, the super collider, will take us as close as humanly possible to his greatest creation, Genesis. This is a Genesis machine. It will celebrate the greatest event in the history of the universe, its birth. Unfortunately, we said Higgs boson, and our machine was canceled, and now a smaller version is going to Geneva, Switzerland.
Well, and could you explain what's going on in Switzerland at the Large Hadron Collider and why that might be important for the rest of us? And what is a Higgs boson?
Well, we have all these subatomic particles that we get by smashing atoms. We smash apart protons, we get quarks, we get thousands of subatomic particles, and so we have a jigsaw puzzle. There's one piece missing in this jigsaw puzzle, and that's the Higgs boson that we hope to find with the Large Hadron Collider. But you see, string theory says that this jigsaw puzzle of particles is nothing but the lowest octave. There's a higher octave. The next octave of the string is called dark matter. And dark matter, we think, makes up most of the universe. Dark matter, we think, is 10 times more plentiful than ordinary matter. So every high school chemistry textbook is wrong. Every textbook says the universe is made out of atoms, period. End of story. That's what the universe is made out of, atoms. We now realize that's wrong. Only 4% of the universe is made of atoms. 23% is made out of an invisible substance called dark matter, which holds the galaxy together, an invisible form of matter. And beyond that, 73% of the universe is dark energy, the energy of the Big Bang, the energy that's driving the universe and making it expand. So we're now beginning to realize that we are children. We are children in terms of trying to understand the fundamental nature of reality. But string theory gives us a comprehensive theory that would explain dark matter as a higher vibration and dark energy as the energy of nothing.
Can I ask you to be James Ussher in the modern context, 400 years later? When did it all begin?
We think that 13.7 billion years ago, there was this explosion that set off the universe. Vibrations from that explosion are still with us today. We have photographed that radiation still circulating around the universe, and by golly, it looks like an explosion in the microwave region. And in fact, if you want to hear that explosion tonight, get a radio, tune between two frequencies, and you hear that static, right? A large portion of that static comes from the Big Bang. So believe it or not, the snow, the static that you see in a TV set, that white noise you hear on a radio, a good fraction of that comes from Genesis itself. So we know that the Big Bang took place 13.7 billion years ago. But then the question is, what happened before the Big Bang? Well, Einstein's theory breaks down at that point. Einstein's theory is useless. We have to go to a theory beyond Einstein, and that, we think, is string theory. Yeah. And in string theory, we have this picture of bubbles. Bubbles popping into existence, bubbles colliding with other bubbles, a multiverse of universes. And so this means that our universe may not be alone. And the Large Hadron Collider will be powerful enough to perhaps probe the fifth dimension. So we're hoping that the Large Hadron Collider, once it's up to speed starting next year, will be powerful enough to probe the fifth dimension.
And this will be the reconciliation of the quantum theory, which the very small, and relativity, the very large, which are mathematically in some ways irreconcilable.
That's right. In my book, Hyperspace, Parallel Worlds, and also my latest book, Physics of the Future, I write that we have two great paradigms in physics. Mother Nature has a left hand and a right hand. The left hand is relativity, the theory of the very big. Black holes, big bangs, quasars, relativity. Then, on the other hand, we have the theory of the very small, atomic physics, lasers, subatomic particles, atom smashers. These two theories hate each other. They have different mathematics, different physical principles. They do not like each other at all. And any attempt to try to put them together makes them explode. We get nonsense. Only string theory has the capability of putting these two theories together like two pieces in a jigsaw puzzle. We now realize that music is the paradigm that can combine the very big with the very small, the music of strings.
Professor, we have to take a short break. Afterwards, I'd like to get into a conversation with you about what just happened in Japan, nuclear power. You write about it in your new book, Physics of the Future, How Science Will Shape Human Destiny and Our Daily Lives by the year 2100. Coming up more in just a few minutes, more with Professor Michio Kaku as we continue our conversations with great minds.
Sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know. I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
Back with more conversations with the great minds. I'm joined by the theoretical physicist at the City University of New York, Professor Michio Kaku, co-founder of string field theory and author of numerous best-selling books, including his most recent, Physics of the Future, How Science Will Shape Human Destiny and Our Daily Lives by the year 2100. Dr. Kaku, you in your book, I'm looking at page 219 here, which begins a rather lengthy discussion of nuclear fission and the different ways that U-238 is separated from U-235 and whatnot. We have just seen in Japan the consequence, I guess arguably for the third time in a big way, of our experimentation with what some would suggest is something beyond our ability to deal with. What is your take on what has happened at Daiichi?
We have to realize that when engineers plan for the future, they very rarely plan for the once-in-a-century event. It's not going to happen in their lifetime. It's not going to happen in their children's lifetime. But hey, sometimes it happens even if you don't plan for it. Look at Katrina. That hurricane that devastated New Orleans was not supposed to happen for 100 years. And if you go back 1,000 years, we had almost the identical tsunami and earthquake that ravaged northern Japan. But that was 1,000 years ago. That earthquake fault erupts every 1,000 years. So it's that once-in-a-century event. Which century will that fault line erupt? Well, around that reactor, they had a 15-foot wall that could take care of most tsunamis. But the wave that came in was 45 feet tall, completely overwhelmed all the safety systems, and the generators were put in the basement. I can't think of anything more stupid than to put the generators of a nuclear power plant in the basement where they can get flooded immediately, and that's what happened. So think of driving a car. You're driving a car, all of a sudden it spins out of control and your brakes don't work. That's what happened in the opening minutes of that accident. And then your radiator heats up and your radiator explodes. That's the hydrogen gas explosion, which took place 4 times at the Daiichi site. Then you find out that your gas tank is about to explode. That's the meltdown. So what do? You drive your car into a river. And that's what stopped the accident in the nick of time. They put seawater from the Pacific Ocean and dumped it right into the reactor, preventing 3 simultaneous meltdowns in the nick of time. They did it right before it was about to explode into 3 gigantic meltdowns. And that's where we are today. A crippled nuclear power plant. It's stable only in the sense that a time bomb is also stable. A small earthquake, a pipe break could set it off because it's just hanging there by your fingernails. So imagine being on a cliff and hanging by your fingernails, and one by one your fingernails start to crack. That's the situation at the reactor right now. It's stable, but only if they can keep enough seawater and fresh water over the cores. A small earthquake could upset this entire scenario.
One of my best friends lives in Tokyo. One of his kids, Natsuko, is here in the United States, but the rest, his other daughter is in Tokyo with him and his wife. And we've been corresponding ever since this happened. In Japan, they refer to it as 3/11, the way we refer to 9/11. And my friend tells me that the media has been fairly reassuring and, don't be so concerned, and Tokyo's a long way away from Fukushima, or Fukushima, depending on how you would say it. Are the citizens of Tokyo safe? And for that matter, what will the consequence of this enormous amount of radiation that not only has gone into the atmosphere, but in particular into the ocean, which is, it seems to me, the basis of much of our food chain, what is this consequence going to be?
Well, Tokyo is 150 miles from the site. The danger zone is out to perhaps 50 miles, so the people of Tokyo are at present relatively safe. However, take a look at the consequence of that accident. The workers at the site are like samurai warriors. They know that many of them are not going to make it out alive because the radiation fields are lethal. But the managers, the utility managers, are incompetent. I get this mental image of Homer Simpson operating a nuclear power plant, totally overwhelmed by what is happening there. We have contamination in the foods, the vegetable, in the milk, in the area around the reactor, in the water. It's 1 million times higher than the legal limit inside the water. This is inevitably going to spread, especially because they're dumping tens of thousands of gallons of radioactive water right into the Pacific Ocean. And remember, it's not stable yet. They hope to stabilize it perhaps later this year. But if they have to evacuate because of a secondary earthquake, another pipe break, more radiation release, if they have to evacuate from that site, then the accident is in free fall. The only thing preventing a meltdown right now are the firemen. The firemen shooting hose water into the reactors. This is not in any nuclear physics textbook. It means that they're literally making it up as they go along. No textbook says that in case of an accident, you call up the local fire department and shoot hose water into a reactor which is in a partial meltdown state. They're literally making it up as they go along. Sadly enough, we are witnessing a science experiment, and we are the guinea pigs.
What would you say to President Obama, who has traditionally supported nuclear power, if he were to ask your opinion of the future of energy and the future of nuclear energy in the United States in particular?
Well, Japan has made the Faustian bargain. Faust was this mythical figure who sold his soul to the devil for unlimited power. Japan has no oil. It has no coal. It has very little hydropower. It's thrown the dice with Faust. That is, unlimited energy, the only price is your soul. And the United States now is undergoing a national debate about whether or not we should also undergo a Faustian bargain. Unlimited power, the only price is your soul. There's a new generation of reactors coming down the line. They're called pebble bed gas-cooled reactors. They are safer than the design used in Japan. That design is 40 years old, by the way. The new design is safer. In fact, during a meltdown, they claim that you could even go out to dinner. Go out to dinner, take in a show, and then take care of the meltdown. But the bottom line is, they melt. And that's something that we have to take into consideration. When I was in high school, my advisor was Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb. He was pro-nuclear, but he was fond of saying that nuclear energy is so dangerous, it does not belong on the surface of the earth. It belongs underground. And if they had built that reactor underground, then all they would have to do is put a manhole cover on it and walk away from it. That's the Faustian bargain. My advisor, Edward Teller, clearly knew the dangers of nuclear power, which could be handled if you take precautions, like putting them underground. Unfortunately, no one heeded his advice, and so we have tragedies like what's emerging in Japan today, and Obama has to confront this problem now in the United States.
What is the future of energy in the United States and around the world? I mean, we've got this giant nuclear reactor 93 million miles away from us. It seems like we should be making some use of that.
Well, yes, the sun is a nuclear power plant. It is 93 or so million miles away. Some people think it's the only safe nuclear power plant precisely because it is 93 million miles away. But look at it this way. Fossil fuel prices are erratic, but in general are going up. But solar hydrogen, renewables, efficiency, that curve is going down. Right now, solar is about twice as expensive as fossil fuels. But because costs of solar hydrogen are going down and the costs of fossil fuels are going up, in about 10 years, they will intersect. At that point, market forces come into play, and market forces will begin to mass produce solar. Tax credits will bring down the cost and make it competitive. So in a 10 years time frame, even without nuclear energy, we will be entering a solar hydrogen era. And then beyond that, in my book, Physics of the Future, I mentioned that fusion power begins to open up in a 20-year time frame. The French are building a gigantic fusion reactor which only operates on seawater. We're talking about a reactor that produces no nuclear waste, like what we have in Japan. Helium gas is the only waste product, and it is commercially valuable. And Russia, the United States, Japan, Korea, and the European Union are backing the French reactor called the ITER. If it is successful, then in 20 years' time, we could be entering the solar fusion era, independent of oil, coal, or even uranium.
We have about 2 minutes left, Professor, and your book, Physics of the Future, covers so much territory, artificial intelligence, medicine, nanotechnology, energy, space travel. What, in your mind, is the most important message you'd like to leave with our viewers about your new book, Physics of the Future?
Let me just make a few predictions. There are hundreds of predictions I make in the book based on interviews with 300 of the world's top scientists. First of all, the internet will be so cheap, it'll be inside your contact lens. You will blink and you will go online. Your contact lens will recognize people's faces, identify who they are, print out the biography in your contact lens, and if they speak Chinese to you, it'll translate the Chinese into English, Russian, or whatever as they speak. This is going to revolutionize the way we interact with reality once our contact lenses are fully intelligent and have the internet on them. Also, when we get in a car, cars will drive themselves. Google is investing millions of dollars to create a GPS-guided car, a robotic car that drives itself without you ever touching the steering wheel. And later, perhaps by mid-century, when you interact with computers, you'll do it mentally through the mind. The mind is a milliwatt radio transmitter. Computers can now decipher the outlines of our thoughts. And so by putting on a little helmet or an earpiece, we'll be able to mentally control computers in our environment, move things around, just like in the science fiction novels. In other words, we will have the power of a Greek god, the ability to think and have our wishes come true.
Extraordinary. Professor Michio Kaku, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
What drives the world?
The fear-mongering used by politicians.
Who makes decisions?
Considerable breakthrough has already been made.
Who can you trust?
No one who is imbued with a global missionary zeal.
Where are we heading?
State-controlled capitalism is called fascism.
When nobody dares to ask, we do. RT, question more.
Welcome back to The Big Picture. I'm Tom Hartman. Coming up in this half hour, we have another edition of our Conversations with Great Minds. I recently sat down with political activist and former White House advisor Van Jones to talk about his latest project, Rebuild the Dream, and what progressives all around the country need to do to get involved and retake power in our nation. With the Tea Party debt limit deal still leaving a sour taste in a lot of our mouths, Van Jones offers up some insights on what we can do about it moving forward. Honor and pleasure to welcome Van Jones to our Conversations with Great Minds. Van, welcome.
Honored to be here.
Thank you. Great to have you with us. I want to get into some detail about your new project, Rebuild the Dream, but first would like to learn a little bit more about Van Jones. What has informed you or inspired you throughout your life?
Well, you know, I was born in 1968. That is the year they really tried to assassinate hope in America. They killed Bobby Kennedy. They killed Dr. King. They beat up a bunch of young people who were at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. And they really tried to kill hope off. And I remember being in kindergarten, 1972, and one of my classmates asking my kindergarten teacher, who was Bobby Kennedy? And Miss Brown started to cry. She choked up trying to explain who he was. And I'd never seen a grown person cry. At least if I had, it didn't register with me. But it really hit me that something bad had happened the year I was born. So I've always been interested. But really my father probably was a person who made me really aware of the world and the need to stand up for justice. He was born in abject poverty on the edge of Memphis, Tennessee, joined the military to get out of poverty, got out, put himself through college. Then he put his little brother through college. Then he helped put a cousin through college. Then he put me and my sister through college. And he was one of those original kind of bootstrapper guys. And he spent his whole life after he got out of the military educating some of the toughest, roughest kids in our county as a assistant principal in a public high school and then a principal in a public middle school. And, you know, I grew up with that kind of service and that kind of dedication, and I've just been that way my whole life.
That's extraordinary. It seems like the Rodney King beating was an initial tipping point for you becoming an activist. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you're right. You know, I wound up, I grew up in this kind of red, white, and blue household with my dad. You know, he'd been a cop in the military, and he was a tough middle school principal, and I kind of went off to Yale for law school. For him, I think that was his happiest day of his life, the proudest day. He kind of lived the American dream. He was really glad. I got to New Haven, Connecticut, and within a couple of weeks I was pretty mad because I saw so much poverty and injustice, which I wasn't prepared for, and decided really I wanted to do something about it. Went to the Bay Area, and while I was there in 1992, the Rodney King verdicts came down. So the younger viewers may not know about this, but there was a guy, African-American man, videotaped being beaten mercilessly by 4 white police officers. and an all-white jury acquitted those officers of wrongdoing, and there were disturbances across America. I, at the time, being a young law student, was asked by the civil rights group I was working for to go out and monitor, see what was going on, and days later went back out to monitor, and there were peaceful demonstrations by that point in San Francisco, but the police arrested everybody, including legal monitors like myself. And I said, look, there's something desperately wrong with our country, where you have videotaped evidence of unlawful police violence. And then here I am, a Yale law student with little glasses and little dreadlocks out there with my clipboard trying to monitor police activity, and I wound up getting arrested myself. I haven't done nothing wrong. And so I moved to what I call the left side of Pluto politically for several years before finally coming back around to some of my dad's tough-minded American idealism. But that journey, I think a lot of people have taken in American life, and I think now many people who had been maybe out of politics, out of public life, were inspired to get back involved, to really believe we could do something in 2008. And I think we've kind of gone from hope to heartbreak, and I want to be a part of bringing some of that hope back.
Yeah, absolutely. You co-founded founded the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights and started the Books Not Bars program, and then you co-founded Color of Change. Was Color of Change a response to Katrina?
Color of Change was a response to Katrina, and really James Rucker took the lead on that. He was an African-American activist, had been a part of MoveOn.org, and helped to, out of Katrina, build an African-American version of MoveOn.org, using some of those high-tech tools and techniques to amplify the voices of people who are concerned about what was happening to the victims of Katrina, but also African-Americans in general. We're very proud of that. Also proud of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, which is also still going forward. You know, we discovered in California that the state was spending $150,000 per year per kid to lock a kid up. And, you know, we did the math at the time. You could send 4 kids to Yale for the cost of sending 1 kid to jail. We said, this is ridiculous. These kids in the classroom don't have books. They don't have chalk. Summer programs are being cut, but we're spending $150K per year per kid locking them up. And then these kids come out, 85, 90% of them wind up in adult prison. So why are we running $150,000 a year prep schools for adult prison? We said, look, give the communities that money. You give any community leader 1 kid and $150,000, that kid is going to never be in trouble again, because you could get the kid therapy, you could take him to Europe, you could do anything and have money left over. And so we started that Books Not Bars campaign. And our objective was just to close the youth prisons in California. People said we were crazy, but we wound up by doing simple, smart things and making sure the money was spent better, helping to cut California's youth prison population by about 30%, working with other partners. We closed about 4 youth prisons and stopped them from building a 5th, the super jail for kids in Oakland, California, and had no increase in youth violence. So we proved that you could take those dollars and listen to the parents, listen to the grandparents, listen to the young people, and devise much smarter ways of helping kids who got in trouble to get out of trouble, rather than spending money to keep them in trouble for the rest of their lives.
You and I have both been trashed by Glenn Beck on his TV show. You much more aggressively than me, and much more publicly. Oh yeah, and
who's Glenn Beck?
Yeah, right. Well, this is just a quick question, but arguably, Color of Change was responsible for taking Glenn Beck off the air, initiating a campaign that led to his leaving the air. I'm curious, just your thoughts on that whole thing, that whole era.
Sure. You know, I was with Color of Change when we first started. We were focused on Katrina. And then once we got that up and running, I went back to work on the Ella Baker Center and eventually created something called Green for All, which I'm sure we'll talk about. James kept growing that organization and took it in different directions. And he did take on Glenn Beck and Fox News for not being responsible, abusing, I would say, the airwaves and putting out things that were not true about me, but probably about you, about so many other people. And eventually, I think that it's a vindication of our system, of American society. You can't just abuse the airwaves. You can't just abuse the public trust and expect the American business community to stand with you and pay for ads on your show when you're saying things that are not true, that are defamatory, and that are misleading the American people. So it wasn't just that James Rucker stood up, it's that the American business community stood back and said, we don't care how many eyeballs you can get with this type of programming, we're not going to put our brands next to yours. And eventually he was made the decision to get off the air. Glenn Beck did. I am excited about the ability that people have now, the kind of little Davids of the world, like a James Rucker, to use new technology to fight for real change and to bring the truth forward. And I hope that we'll be able to keep net neutrality and an open, free internet so that people like James Rucker and others can do those kinds of services for our country.
Yeah, that is going to be a challenge going forward. You worked in the White House as a green jobs czar. I'm curious your thoughts, on just that experience in general, and perhaps, I was going to say more importantly, that's probably the wrong phrase, but I'm also curious about your thoughts on the Obama presidency. You were right there, front row center. How do you think things are going?
Yes. Well, first of all, I got a chance to serve for 6 months in the White House. That will always be my highest honor. There is no higher honor in American life than to serve in the White House. No matter what else I do in life, that's the high point for me. Best 6 months of my life, followed by the toughest 2 weeks when I chose to resign. But what I would say about the Obama presidency is that given the mess that Obama inherited from the prior administration, any president was going to struggle. And I think that the American people forgot that when we were out there in 2008 and we were excited and everybody was talking about hope and change, the slogan was never, yes, he can. The slogan was, yes, we can. And I think over the past couple of years, we've slacked off. We haven't been out there talking to our friends, talking to our neighbors, going to the farmers markets, going into the laundromats, having rallies, and doing the things that makes a democracy function. And because we tried to outsource democracy to one person in the White House, the other side amplified their efforts, and I think we have suffered as a country as a result of it. We have had a very one-sided conversation now for almost 2 years. I'm not mad at the end of the day for the more right-wing perspective being so loud. I'm frustrated at the more progressive point of view, maybe the more humane, more balanced point of view, being so quiet. And I think that the Obama presidency and all of D.C. will be better when the American people are, and especially those of us with more humane and balanced views, are more active.
You wrote an amazing book just before that time, The Green Collar Economy, that probably in part led to your being there in the White House, about how an investment here would take us out of the pollution-based gray economy and into a healthy new green economy. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I mean, I think the argument still holds. Right now, we are still clinging fingers and toes to the last century's pollution-based economy, using fossil fuels that are based on dead things from the past. Meanwhile, now our friends in China are racing past us, and they are using, they're certainly using some fossil fuels, but they are now ahead of us in wind and solar and using those things that are renewable and based on living sources of energy, like the living sun. And my view is that everything that is good for the environment is a job. Solar panels don't put themselves up. Wind turbines don't manufacture themselves. Biofuel crops don't grow themselves. Everything that's good for the economy is a job. And so if we want to put people back to work, let's connect the people who most need work to the work that the earth most needs to have done, which is repowering humanity on a clean basis and fight pollution and poverty at the same time and beat the global recession and global warming at the same time. That's the basic argument of my book, The Green Collar Economy. I think the argument is even more true now than it was then.
Yeah, so very well said. We will. I want to get into your new project, the Rebuild the Dream project, right after this break. More with Van Jones on this Conversations with Great Minds in just a second.
Do you like RT? Show it to the world. Go online and check out our brand new internet store with official RT products. Question more with RT gear.
Welcome back to Conversations with Great Minds. Tonight I'm talking with Van Jones, powerhouse of cultural and political reform, who also happens to be a distinguished scholar, best-selling author, and now the leader of Rebuild the Dream. Van, you're now spearheading this program, Rebuild the Dream. Tell us about it.
Well, it's exciting to me. You know, I took after I resigned from the White House, I took a year off. I taught at Princeton. I studied, and I really tried to understand what happened. You know, we went from hope to heartbreak. What was the mechanism by which we lost the moment to really push America in the positive, hopeful, optimistic direction that we were headed in? So I studied the Tea Party, and I studied the tactics that they use, the techniques, and I came away actually really impressed. I said, you know, these people have figured out something in American politics, and we need to pay attention. Those of us who have different views about the economy, they took a bunch of old ideas and a bunch of pre-existing organizations. They realigned them, rebranded them, and re-presented them to the American people as something new and exciting. And suddenly people went chasing off after that bunny rabbit, and frankly, I think now into a cul-de-sac. I thought to myself, well, we actually have good ideas for the economy. We don't think that we should throw Medicare under the bus and Social Security under the bus and teachers under the bus and veterans under the bus. We think we should actually respect those institutions and invest in them and ask wealthy people to pay their fair share. And it turns out that the supermajority of Americans agree that we should have a balanced approach to our budget problems. You know, American families don't say, hey, we got a budget problem, let's starve grandma. That's not how American families think. We say, hey, listen, let's cut back on the non-essentials, and then let's go have Junior go get a paper route, or Susie will start doing hair on the side, and we'll bring in some new revenues. You cut back on non-essentials and you increase the revenues. That's how American families handle budget crises. Well, turns out supermajority of Americans want America's government to pursue the same approach, which is to cut back on non-essentials. Don't cut fat and muscle and bone and marrow, which is the Tea Party program, but to cut back on non-essentials while we grow some revenues and ask the wealthy people in America to pay their fair share. If you do well in America, you should be willing to do well by America, especially in a crisis. And so we said, what is the organization? What is the campaign that is carrying that message forward? It's a supermajority opinion, but obviously it's not making a difference in Washington, D.C. Both political parties seem to be off the rails somewhere. The whole town of D.C. seems to be stuck on stupid, talking about either austerity or massive austerity, but nobody's talking about investing in America and creating jobs. So who's sticking up for jobs, not cuts? Who's doing it? We couldn't find an organization. We said, let's start one. And so Rebuild the Dream is a support center for creating a new movement that we call the American Dream Movement. And we have now about 150 partners, including some of the big superstar powerhouse organizations on the progressive side of the ledger, MoveOn.org, the AFL-CIO, Planned Parenthood, the Center for Community Change, Green for All, Campaign for America's Future. So many organizations, I can't name them all, have decided to stand together. Let's put this idea out of having a movement to defend the American dream, to fight for jobs for middle-class Americans, the people who want to join the middle class. And we put the website up. We said, hey, does anybody have any good ideas in America for fixing the economy besides just trashing Medicare? And we hope to get about 500 to 1,000 good ideas. We didn't get 500 ideas, didn't get 1,000. We got 24,000 ideas, the first 15,000 in 3 days of Americans with brilliant ideas about how to fix our problems. We said, that's great. let's call for House meetings all across America so that people can actually discuss these ideas. The Tea Party, when it started with House meetings, and they had 800 across America, and people were stunned. This weekend, the American Dream Movement, supported by RebuildTheDream.com, is not going to have 800 House meetings. We're going to have 1,584, almost twice as many as the Tea Party started out with. So we think that we're onto something. We think that just as the Tea Party got about 3,000 organizations ultimately to stand together under a common banner with a common idea about these massive cuts, we think we can get many, many thousand organizations to stand together, and individuals as well, under a common banner of the American dream, to say jobs, not cuts, and to defend American infrastructure from this, we think, reckless attack from D.C. The dream killers cannot prevail. Those who still believe in America, who still believe that America is exceptional because we have an exceptionally large middle class, we have exceptionally smart social programs and services, essential services, a safety net, that's American exceptionalism. We think those people who still believe in the American dream are the supermajority in America, and RebuildTheDream.com is about supporting those people coming to voice.
I got to tell you, it is absolutely astounding to me. I have sat through so many organizing meetings, activist meetings from literally, I'm a bit older than you, literally from my days in the SDS in the late 60s, before you were born or about the time you were born, to 3 weeks ago. And it's like, so often people are competing. There's infighting. There's all these politics, and I'm just astounded you were able to pull all this together.
I tell you one thing. If it were just me trying to do it, it wouldn't have worked. I think what has happened is that we have a certain wisdom and maturity across all these organizations. These organizations remember what it was like in 2008 when we were unified. And we remember what it was like in 2010 when we were not unified. And that is the big teacher. And so, I'm proud to be one of many, many, many leaders. I have a big mouth. But so many leaders have been saying, let's go ahead and get together and defend our values. And because we've already gone through the process of 2008, people, it's just like putting back on that old jersey, those sneakers that feel so good. And that's really, I think, the reason for the success.
Yeah, well, you've done a marvelous job. The contract for the American Dream that is, or the Rebuild the Dream program, seems to be, from the time I've spent on the website, subdivided into basically 4 categories: strong communities, we all pay our share, working democracy, and good jobs now. Why those 4, and could you speak to each of those?
Well, the reason for those 4 is that we wanted to create some subdivisions to give people a sense of where they might be more interested. Some people might be more interested in the idea of a working democracy and how are we going to get our democracy back from these corporations and stop the union busting. So we wanted those people where there's a lot of energy to be able to move in that direction, and the other categories as well. I think the most important thing I can say to the viewers in the time we have left, go on the website yourself. It's RebuildTheDream.com, as in community. RebuildTheDream.org is another effort, but RebuildTheDream.com is, I think, an incredible flowering. There are so many creative ideas. I mean, some of the ideas that have come forward are things I've been in politics for a long time, maybe not as long as you, but a long time from my point of view. And I tell you, some of these ideas are so creative. Ways, for instance, instead of saying to the corporations, we'll give you a big tax break, now go out there and create jobs, why not give the tax credit to the individual American and let that American then go to that corporation and say, you get the tax break, but only if you hire me, buddy. And that would actually be a much more targeted way to use our tax breaks to create jobs. Brilliant ideas like that. Americans are so creative, have so many good ideas. The D.C. crowd gets so inbred with a couple of ideas, unfortunately often mostly bad, of late. We believe that once the American people have spoken and we can take those best ideas forward, we can have a movement that will be 2 or 3 times bigger than the Tea Party and actually give us our movement we had in 2008 back. But this time, people-owned, people-powered, based on principles, and with the forward momentum that can't be stopped.
Van, you talked about how when you analyzed the Tea Party, what you saw was that they were repackaging old ideas. We've had successful ideas in the United States in the past. Alexander Hamilton's model for building a modern industrial state, for example, that he put forward in 1791 to the Washington administration and got largely ratified in 1793 and held until the late 1990s. I'm curious to what extent the stuff that you're getting, the ideas that you're getting, and the direction that you're thinking about going or suggesting or whatever might be inspired by things like Hamilton or like Franklin Roosevelt or Teddy Roosevelt, for that matter. Just busting up some of the too-big-to-fail organizations, some of those old ideas that actually worked. We have about 3 minutes left right now.
Well, I think the ideas are inspired really across the board. Ordinary Americans are the ones who are going on and uploading ideas. Like I said, we were hoping maybe we'll get 500, even 1,000 ideas. You look back at our papers, we'll probably get 1,000 submissions, and we have more than 20,000. And I'm sure there's a mix. The fundamental, I think, inspiration isn't any one particular thinker. It's a particular value, and it's the value that the last century, what the so-called American century, was a century that the progressive patriots like you and I won. Okay? Mm-hmm. In 1900, we didn't have a middle class. We didn't have, black people couldn't vote, women couldn't vote, children were working in the factories, the environment was being trashed. And some patriots looked around and said, hey, that's fine with me, I love it. But there was another set of patriots, the deeper patriots, not the cheaper patriots. The deeper patriots who said, look, we're never going to be perfect, but we can have a more perfect union than this. And decade after decade, those deeper patriots moved America to become the literal envy of the world, with a big middle class, a safety net, equal rights, the whole deal. We have a long way to go, but we went a long way. And nobody who I think has gone on that website believes we should repeal the 20th century. That is the agenda of our opponents. They want to repeal the 20th century. They want to smash down every American institution our grandparents fought for, from the labor unions to public education to the safety net to really the American middle class. And we should not let that happen without a big fight, the biggest fight in the history of the country, to save America's middle class, to save the achievements of our grandparents, and to make sure that the American century, the 20th century, is not repealed so that some corporations don't have to pay their taxes.
Yeah, so very well said. In the minute we have left here, Van Jones, what's other than the call for action to go to the website, what would you say to the American people who are feeling perhaps dispirited that things don't seem to be working fast enough for them?
Help is on the way. First of all, change happens fast now. Obama seemed to come out of nowhere. If you're Hillary Clinton, Obama came out of nowhere. Then the Tea Party came out of nowhere. Madison came out of nowhere. Egypt came out of nowhere. The next big movement is on its way already. It's going to seem to come out of nowhere. It's going to come out of the hearts and the minds of the American people. Go to rebuildthedream.com. Tomorrow, go to one of these House meetings. You are not alone. We are the supermajority in our country. We just have not had a chance to meet each other and find each other. That ends tomorrow. That ends this weekend. Rebuildthedream.com. You can find one of the 1,500 House meetings this weekend, and we are going to begin the process, not of taking America back, of taking America forward.
Brilliant. Van Jones, thanks so very much for being with us tonight.
Honored to be here.
That's the big picture for tonight. For more information on the stories we covered, visit our websites at tomhartman.com, freespeech.org, and RT.com. And don't forget, democracy begins with you. Get out there and get active. Tag You're It. See you next week.
UFO believers, listen up. You may well be vindicated. We are back with an out-of-this-world town square and a new book out later this week. Government officials, pilots, and scientists going on the record about their own close encounters. Michio Kaku, professor of physics at CUNY University and host of Sci-Fi Science on the Science Channel. Got to read the book early, and he joins us with a review. Quite simply, Professor, do unidentified flying objects without question exist?
95% of all UFO sightings can be immediately identified as the planet Venus, weather balloons, weather anomalies, swamp gas, you name it, we've got it nailed. It's the 5% that give you the willies. 5% remain totally unexplained.
And you're saying to 5% unexplained to the point where they are legitimately an unidentified flying object.
And we're talking about generals. We're talking about Air Force pilots. We're talking about governors of states that claim that, hey, this is beyond our understanding of the laws of physics.
Can I have an unidentified flying object that is not necessarily from some other place?
It's possible, but we've looked at all the alternatives. These are multiple sightings by multiple modes. In other words, pilots, eyewitnesses, radar, visual sightings. These are very hard to dismiss, the handful of sightings. One over Alaska, another over Belgium, another over Iran. The handful of things that still cannot be explained defy known laws of physics.
So then, by that definition, does this confirm the existence of life on other planets, in your opinion?
I wouldn't go that far. We need alien DNA or an alien chip. That would nail it to the wall right there. We don't have that. We don't have the smoking gun. But this book is as close as you're going to get to the smoking gun. We're talking about senior military officials who were involved in the investigations of these incidents saying we are clueless.
If you were to look at those who argue, well, hang on, there's no way that they could get here from some other planet, that the technology doesn't exist, the stars are too far away, you rebut that sort of thinking with what?
Those people assume that there may be 100 years ahead of us, in which case it's impossible for them to reach us. But if they're 1,000, 1,000,000 years ahead of us, then new laws of physics begin to open up. So we have to open our mind to the possibility that they're not just a super version of us, that they could be thousands, millions of years more advanced.
Why would they not then pay us a visit in a way that is more recognizable? Go visit the White House, maybe stop out to Yellowstone.
My point of view is if you're walking on a country road in St. Anthill, do you go down to the ants and say, I bring you trinkets, I bring you beads, I give you nuclear energy, or perhaps maybe you step on a few of them? If they're that advanced, maybe they simply are not that interested in us.
All right. Listen, Professor, it is an absolute pleasure. If we have any strange sightings, at least now I know who to call. Before I let you go, do you teach on this subject at the university? On UFOs
I mentioned it when I teach astronomy. Also in Sci-Fi Science, we have a whole episode about what kinds of physics could open up in the next 1,000, next million years.
That could let us travel a few million miles at a time.
New kinds of physics on the Science Channel.
Very cool. Listen, a pleasure. That does it for us. I'm Dylan Radigan. Hardball's up right now.
You give us your most negative impression for the future of Japan and your most optimistic impression for the future of Japan.
Well, the most optimistic one is that the workers put water over the reactor core, electricity is turned on, it's stable, and then it's going to take another 10 years in order to repair the damage of these reactors. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is they have to evacuate. The workers have to evacuate because radiation levels are too beyond comprehension. It means we're in free fall. All 3 reactors have a meltdown. It means a catastrophe beyond comprehension, more than Chernobyl.
And affecting more than just the island of Japan.
It could then go into the oceans where it could contaminate, well, sea life as well as, of course, northern Japan. Parts of it could be a dead zone. We're talking about mammoth amount of thyroid cancers, especially in children, food that has to be impounded, an economy reduced to ruins in northern Japan. So that's the worst case.
This is the worst case. I mean, doesn't it make you want to just get a cab and never get out?
Well, that's why people are leaving. That's why some of my relatives decided to leave rather than face that.
This Indian Point thing, as far as I know, my house has no nuclear power in it. We don't like the dishwasher. None of that uses nuclear power. I don't want Indian Point. I live down the street. It's like at a cul-de-sac, and I'm just down the. I don't want that anymore. How can we get them to take that away? And I think earlier I said it was run by people in Arkansas. I think it's run by people in Louisiana. Nope. I'm sorry. I don't know. But I don't want it. I didn't vote for it. I don't want it. And, you know, I can just get AAA batteries. I don't need it. What do we do to get it out of here?
Well, a certain fraction of the lights right here in this room comes from Indian
We
Point.
can do without them.
Right. And, of course, you know, there is a trade-off. It means that we have to buy energy from Canada and other places. Rates are going to go up a little bit.
Yeah.
You know?
Rates go up anyway.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the governor of New York State has even said, out with Indian Point. Even the governor.
Now, is there anything he can do about that legislatively?
Well, we have to, like, make sure that the politicians are aware of it and put pressure on the politicians. Yeah. In fact, even one NRC official said that if we had a chance to relicense that reactor, knowing today we probably would not license that reactor.
Yeah, that's, as the kids say, a no-brainer. But I can remember a few years ago they had trouble with emergency alarms going off up there. And it was like, well, is that really radioactive steam leaking, or is it just a bad alarm? I'm not sure. But why? I mean, we have so many gangs and so much violence in this city. Why don't we send a bunch of these gangs up there just to take the thing apart? You know, and then look the other way.
That's the Letterman solution, right?
That would be my solution.
Allison, we are waiting on a news conference out of NASA today about a new spacecraft. Call it an asteroid spotter, set to give us a better look at what's in space around us. And that matters because, well, recently planet Earth had a near miss from an asteroid. It missed us by a mere 8,700 miles. That may make you feel better. However, that is lower than our satellites in orbit. That's New York to Bangkok by way of airplane. Will this new high-tech spacecraft be a line of defense against asteroids and other space-based killers? Let's ask Michio Kaku, physics professor, host of the new Science Channel series, Sci-Fi Science, based on his New York Times bestseller, Physics of the Impossible. It will air every week starting the 1st of December. How you doing?
Very good.
WISE is the name of it. Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. Man, I hope it's WISE. What can it do?
WISE is the first systematic attempt by NASA to track these lumps of rocks in outer space. It's an asteroid hunter. Before we had amateurs looking in the night sky. At daytime, they can't look for asteroids. If it rains, a thunderstorm, all the telescopes have to be shut down. This is going to operate 24 hours a day.
Okay. To me, it looks like R2-D2. Tell me I'm wrong. I mean, wasn't this conceived by George Lucas in 1976 or whatever the year, 77? Sorry?
We're catching up to Star Wars. WISE will take a picture every 11 seconds and download this pictures 4 times a day to the planet Earth. In 6 months, it should get about 1.5 million pictures.
So it's sending back. Is it in real time?
Not quite in real time. That's one of the defects of the system. This is the first step, a first baby step toward a systematic, real-time observation of the entire
sky. But when we were here on Friday, we were talking about an asteroid that wasn't that very large.
It was 30 feet across, and then in March, an asteroid 100 feet across skimmed the Earth. If that had hit, it would have wiped out New York City.
There's a good chance we would not be sitting here today talking about R2-D2, but this one can track an asteroid 2 miles or bigger?
That's in the main...
I'm not feeling better. I mean, 2 miles is a pretty good chunk.
That's in the main asteroid belt. They say that if an object, they track it and they zero in on it, they can get it down to maybe like 500 feet. But remember, something as big as 100 feet could literally wipe out the entire New York metropolitan area. So this is the first baby step. We need to have real-time observations. We need to have objects about 100 feet tracked by radar and by infrared and other means.
The truth is, and I'm glad NASA's on this. In fact, it really wasn't on their radar, literally, until about 3 years ago, 2006, when they started thinking, we need to see everything that's out there. Now, the truth is, though, you can see an asteroid a lot further in advance before it comes our way. In other words, there should be at some point no excuse for us missing one of these. It's not like you're going to get hit in the middle of the night. We see them miles away.
That's right. Amateurs can do this. In fact, in 2029, there will be an asteroid that you can see with the naked eye that will skim right beneath our satellites. That's the Apophis asteroid. It's about the size of the Rose Bowl. If it were to hit, it would wipe out a good metropolitan city.
Yes, it would.
And it will be visible with the naked eye and with binoculars.
Holy smokes. Okay, so even if we map this universe, okay, figure out what the asteroids are doing, maybe sometime figure out what the space junk is doing, what can we do about it? Can we deflect it? Can we send it in a different orbit?
That's tough, because right now we are going to be phasing out the space shuttle next year. We're going to have to ask the Russians for permission to go into outer space for 5 years. We have no way of shooting down an asteroid in outer space. The space shuttle can't even reach deep space to intercept such an asteroid. However, I think we should take initial steps to begin thinking seriously about how we could either push an asteroid out of the way or, if necessary, blow it up.
And when you come up with that idea, you're going to be a very rich man. Because it's not just a NASA issue. This is a planetary issue. It could ultimately affect each and every one of us. Okay, noon Eastern time. That's the press conference. We're going to see him roll out that new gadget then, okay? Michio, great to see you, okay? December 1st, big series. Good luck.
Let's bring in physicist Dr. Michio Kaku. It's good to have you back with us for this. And we just heard in Ryan's report, and the nuclear waste being just behind some fabric barriers. What is the most dangerous right here? What's the most concern?
Well, the good news is that we no longer store our atomic bombs at Los Alamos like we used to, especially after World War II. However, the danger is that there are 20 to 30,000 barrels, 55-gallon drums, containing plutonium-contaminated waste. Everything from gloves to helmets to nuclear materials from the reactors. The danger is that a fire could split them open, release plutonium into the air. Plutonium is the most toxic chemical known to science. A microgram you can't even see in your lungs will cause lung cancer.
And to fight this, the dangers that the firefighters must be in to battle this, and the special training and equipment that they need?
That's the weak spot, because in 2009, the Department of Energy said that the local fire department, they may not be trained to handle the very specialized nuclear materials and equipment stored on site. That made a lot of people uneasy, realizing that our first line of defense, the firemen, may be overwhelmed when they enter a weapons laboratory.
And Dr. Kaku, the floodwaters in Nebraska and the nuclear plants that are there, it's been very much in the news, a lot of concern. What's the biggest danger there?
That accident in Nebraska is like Fukushima in slow motion. At Fukushima, the tipping point was hit almost immediately by the tsunami, which overwhelmed the pumps and safety systems. Here, we have time. But the flood waters are rising. If they rise a few feet more, we could see pumps begin to fail. At that point, in a worst-case scenario, we could drop cooling water, and then it's like Fukushima 2.0.
But the Fort Calhoun nuclear station, that's been shut down since April. So doesn't that help?
It helps, but it takes 36 hours for water to boil off once the pumps fail. At that point, water levels begin to drop. Now, again, we don't expect that to happen, but if it were to happen, it would be Fukushima all over again.
And speaking of Fukushima all over again, a lot of people are wondering, what's the latest there? What's going on there? We haven't really been hearing much.
The thing is not yet stable. Next year, they hope to finally get the pumps circulating. Just this morning, it was announced that they tried to get the pumps to work to circulate the water. It failed.
It did.
Recent estimates are that perhaps 30 to 50 years to clean up that nuclear disaster.
Yeah, we can't forget over there either, as we are concerned here at home, too. Dr. Kaku, thank you. Always good to see you. Appreciate it.
If you were to shut off gravity right now, the sun would explode, the Earth would fall apart, and we'd be flung into outer space at 1,000 miles per hour. So it's gravity that keeps us rooted onto the Earth and holds and binds the galaxy and the solar system together.
Scientists had been able to calculate the effects of gravity for centuries. But until Einstein, what caused it had remained a mystery. The answer was stranger than anyone had imagined.
Einstein's great insight was to realize that gravity is caused by the bending of space and time. So gravity is not really pulling me down to the ground, it is space that is pushing me down.
Einstein called his theory general relativity.
The theory of relativity is infamous for its difficulty. I want to show that there's nothing peculiarly difficult about it.
Space isn't simply an empty void. It can be bent and stretched.
Let me illustrate this with an example here. Let's imagine that this piece of jelly is the space. Then the presence of matter is to distort the space.
All massive objects, like stars and planets, bend the space and time around them. Any object that passes through that warped space-time will move as if being pulled by a force. And this is what we experience as gravity.
Einstein's theory of relativity does lead us into very strange and unfamiliar paths.
Relativity is perfectly intelligible to anybody who is willing to think.
Einstein's theory has withstood the test of time for almost a century. If there's one data point out of place, we would have to throw the entire theory out. Everywhere we look in the heavens, Einstein's theory comes right on the spot.
But less than a year after it was published, theorists realized general relativity predicted something so profoundly troubling, many believed it couldn't exist in the real world. Anything very heavy and very small would create such a strong gravitational field that space and time would be bent and twisted to breaking point.
Three months after the worst nuclear disaster in history, there is daunting news from Japan. Officials still trying to cool 3 melted nuclear cores with seawater, releasing radioactive steam into the atmosphere and creating vast liquid pools of toxic waste. The situation remains incredibly dangerous. I spoke with Michio Kaku about this ongoing crisis a short time ago. He's a professor of physics at City University in New York and author of Physics of the Future. Michio Kaku, thanks for joining us. Do they have control of the situation at the site?
No. It's still a ticking time bomb. Realize that after the big Sumatra tsunami, 90 days after, 3 months after that, there was a huge aftershock. If they have another aftershock, and they're not in cold shutdown yet till next year, the accident could start all over again. It's like hanging by your fingernails. Yeah, it's stable, but you're hanging by your fingernails.
Americans think this crisis is over, or that some even think that maybe it's solved or it's contained. It's not. What's happening right now?
In the last 2 weeks, everything we knew about that accident has been turned upside down. We were told 3 partial meltdowns, don't worry about it. Now we know it was 100% core melt in all 3 reactors. Radiation, minimal that was released. Now we know it was comparable to the radiation at Chernobyl. And as far as evacuation, yeah, 12 miles, that's it. You don't have to evacuate beyond 12 miles. Now they find hotspots, 4 hotspots outside the evacuation zone. 34,000 school children now have radiation badges when they go to school.
Kindergartners with radiation
badges. Down to 4 years of age. Can you imagine that? Kindergarten kids with radiation badges going to school. So all the mythology of the accident has been turned upside down because utility has finally fessed up to how severe this accident really was.
In your view, did they not know how bad it was, or they knew and they didn't tell, or they just were completely blown away by the scope of the disaster?
I'm a physicist, and we tried to reconstruct the accident in our computers given the feeble amount of information they gave us. We knew it was much more severe than they were saying because radiation was coming out left and right. So, in other words, they lied to us. They knew how much radiation was coming out. They knew the danger. They knew how much core melting was taking place, but they tried to put a happy face on it.
As a reporter, within hours of the earthquake and tsunami, within hours, not even a day, there were already statements from the company and from the International Atomic Energy Association saying that there had been safe shutdown of all of the reactors. And we know, of course, in the end that simply wasn't true. But from the very beginning, they were trying to tell us that this was a safe situation.
Within hours of the accident, we now know it was like the Keystone Cops. People that are clueless, headless, just running around crazy, not knowing what to do. We can now reconstruct that accident minute by minute, hour by hour, and we can see this chaos that erupted in the leadership of the utility.
What's happening to the people who are working there now?
Well, as you know, workers are being sent in, and they're getting, like a year's dose of radiation just within like 10 minutes at a time. At Chernobyl, 600,000 workers had to be mobilized, each one going in just for a few minutes, each one getting a medal from Gorbachev.
This will be the 100-year cleanup. How long will it take to clean this up, in your view?
50 to 100 years.
And we're not there yet. We're not to the point of talking about the cleanup yet because they haven't stopped the reaction. It's still happening.
Cleanup hasn't even started yet. They're not in cold shutdown till next year. Cold shutdown is when boiling stops.
Right.
It's boiling water right there at the reactor, releasing radiation into the environment and releasing radiation into gigantic vats.
How are they storing and disposing of this stuff?
That's the killer, because they have all these vats that are filling up now. They may have to dump it into the ocean again. At that point, the Chinese, the Koreans, the fishermen, they get up all in arms because there's so much damage that every time you put water in, it leaks right out again, highly radioactive, and it's filling up at the site now.
So what do they do with it?
Right now, they're just counting the number of gallons as they pile up, desperately trying to bring more vats in. But once they saturate, they're going to have to dump. And at that point, it's another crisis.
Let's talk about the radiation in the environment, in the atmosphere. We've been told that it would be measurable but minuscule amounts on the U.S. West Coast, around the world. Is that true?
It's still minimal around the world. Most of the damage is concentrated within 20 miles, 50 miles of the reactor accidented site. That's where we have the hot spots. That's where we have 20 times normal amount of radiation in schoolyards outside the evacuation zone. But in New York City, you can actually see it in the milk. You can actually see that iodine 131 actually spiked a little bit in our milk in New York City, but it's very small.
Just even hearing that, though, I mean, even hearing that you can detect it, that there's a catastrophe that is the worst catastrophe, industrial catastrophe in history, that we can see it in milk in New York, that's frightening.
That's right. This could be the granddaddy of all industrial accidents, topping Chernobyl at 200 billion, topping the Gulf oil spill at about 15 billion, topping the Challenger Columbia disasters in space at about 10 billion. This could be the world's record holder for an industrial accident.
How many 100 years to clean up the site? I mean, when you're looking at this much radiation, 3 exposed cores, this much environmental damage, I mean, that must be staggering for that part of the country.
It's unimaginable. Realize that at Chernobyl, it was just 1 core's worth of radiation causing a $200 billion accident, and it's still ongoing. Here we have 20 cores worth of radiation. 3 totally melted, 1 damaged, and the rest in spent fuel ponds.
Right.
20 cores worth of highly radioactive materials.
And it's impossible at this point to even imagine the long-term health effects for the people in that area.
At Chernobyl, even taking very, very conservative estimates, you're talking about perhaps 10,000 leukemia and thyroid cancer cases because of Chernobyl. This could be comparable.
All right, Michio Kaku, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Certainly a frightening story still unfolding there. When we come back,
when we physicists look in outer space for alien life, we don't look for little green men. We look for type 1, type 2, and type 3 civilizations. A type 1 civilization has harnessed its planetary power. They control earthquakes, the weather, volcanoes. They have cities on the ocean. Anything planetary, they control. That's type 1. A type 2 civilization is stellar. They've exhausted the power of a planet, and they get their energy directly from their mother star. They don't get a suntan on a weekend. They use solar flares. They use the power of the sun itself to energize their huge machines. Eventually, they exhaust the power of a star, and they go galactic. They harness the power of billions of stars within a galaxy. Now, what are we on this scale? We are type 0. We don't even rate on this scale. We get our energy from, not from stars or galaxies, we get our energy from dead plants, oil and coal.
Historians will look back and say, holy shit, they were making materials, selling them for corporation profit over and over and over and over again with absolutely no reference to what the planet had and recycling protocols and everything else. They were burning fossil fuels at 1,000,000 times the rate of their actual renewability. They're going to laugh at us, wondering what the hell kind of primitive, dumbass species we actually were, if we even survived to reach that point.
From an extraterrestrial perspective, our global civilization is clearly on the edge of failure in the most important task it faces, preserving the lives and well-being of its citizens and the future habitability of the planet.
This transition is also the most important because it's not clear if we're going to make it. When we look at outer space, we see no evidence of type 1, 2, or 3 anywhere. No evidence whatsoever. The mathematics say that there should be thousands of type 1, 2, and 3 civilizations in the galaxy. We see no evidence of any whatsoever. And why is that? Because the transition from type 0 to type 1 is the most dangerous of all transitions. We may not make it.
I hope everyone out there will understand that either we change or we die.
War, poverty, corruption, hunger, misery, human suffering will not change in a monetary system. That is, there'll be very little significant change. It's going to take the redesign of our culture, our values, and it has to be related to the carrying capacity of the earth, not some human opinion or some politician's notions of the way the world ought to be, or some religious notions of the conduct of human affairs.
So again, the generation now alive and our grandchildren are the most important generations ever to walk the surface of the earth. We are the generations that will determine whether we make the transition from type 0 to type 1 or we destroy ourselves because of our arrogance and our weapons. Now, every time I read the newspaper, I see evidence of this historic transition from type 0 to type 1. And I am privileged to be alive in the most important era in the history of the human race, the transition from type 0 to type 1.
The old appeals to racial, sexual, and religious chauvinism and to rabid nationalist fervor are beginning not to work. A new consciousness is developing which sees the earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed. We are one planet.
You bring up robots, and one of the themes of This Week in Science is This Week in World Robot Domination. So it's good to know that that future might be further off than we're thinking.
And in fact, my point of view is that at some distant point in the future, when robots do become gradually more intelligent, instead of fearing them, we should either put a chip in their brain to shut them off if they get murderous, or we should merge with them. Because our descendants, hundreds of years from now, may have a choice. A, get older and older every year and die, or B, wake up in an genetically enhanced body of silicon and glass and live forever. So if you were faced with that choice, live a decrepit life, aging year after year, or be a Superman, young, handsome, virulent, and immortal, which would you choose?
We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
Why do you resist? We only wish to raise quality of life for all species.
I like my species the way it is.
To Mother Nature now, and an increasing risk posed by wildfires and floods to the nation's nuclear facilities. A massive wildfire has crept upon the secretive Los Alamos nuclear weapons facility in New Mexico. More than 12,000 residents have been evacuated, and in Nebraska at the Fort Calhoun nuclear plant, well, that's totally surrounded by water. NBC's Mike Taibbi is in Blair, Nebraska. And Mike, both plants there in Nebraska on the river's edge. Do officials believe those plants pose any immediate risk to the safety of the public?
No, Martin, and they want to be very clear about this, no immediate risk. Of course they're watching the situation, and the tide is going to be high, the rivers are going to be high all through the summer before the rivers finally recede. The snowpack was so thick, the snow melt still coming down, rains forecast above average for the rest of the summer, so they'll be watching it. But right now, the river level is down, even though it still looks like an island and looks very threatening, the river level is down right now. Let's talk about what we're talking about. When a story like this one occurs, inches of water matter, and in fact, the river, as high as it is right now, is still some 8 feet below, I guess, what people on the outside might call panic stage, the stage when the ultimate defenses and systems and safety systems and redundancies would all kick in. So they think that that's not going to happen. They're pretty sure of that. It would take a 1,000-year storm, they say, a 1,000-year flood in order to create the conditions that they're talking about. And right now, the river level has gone down slightly from the high water marks that were reached over the weekend. So everybody's pretty optimistic right now in terms of the federal officials we spoke to. And we talked to the head of the NRC, Greg Yasik, this morning, and he said that he's going back to Washington. He's got people on the scene here they'll be watching. And the local officials who run this plant, they're taking inspections 24/7, they say, and looking at every part of both the facility here and looking at the facility up at Cooper Station about 80 miles south of here, and they're saying right now everything is stable and under control. That's the word from here, and good news about the level of the water having gone down a bit.
Absolutely, Mike, but to many people looking at the pictures and images, as you say, it looks pretty threatening. Are there any plans for evacuations in the area?
Well, there are no plans beyond the plans that are always in place for people in the potential impact area. In fact, we were at a place called the Rustic Diner down the street here in Fort Calhoun last night, and it just so happens, coincidentally, that this is the time when they were getting their annual mailing about evacuation plans should something happen. But nothing beyond that. Nobody here has evacuated in Omaha, even though they're within a 50-mile radius, about 1 million people, nearly 500,000 just in Omaha alone, who live within the potential impact area. No evacuations yet, not one.
Mike Taibbi in Nebraska, thanks so much for joining us. As we keep an eye on developments in New Mexico and Nebraska, there are new concerns about what's being done to prevent a Fukushima-style disaster here at home. In all, there are 104 nuclear sites across America, with 3 under siege right now. But officials at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission insist there is no need for panic. But as wildfires swell and floodwaters rise, when will it be time to raise the red flag? I'm joined now by Michio Kaku, Professor of Physics at the City University of New York here. And good afternoon, sir. We've got a raging forest fire on the doorstep of the Los Alamos National Lab, and nuclear reactors in Nebraska partially underwater. Is this unprecedented?
This is unprecedented. This is a triple whammy, a triple threat that we've never seen before. 2 commercial plants, 1 weapons plant under siege. We're talking about the 100-year storm, the 100-year fire. We were assured that these would not happen for 100 years, and yet they're happening.
How dangerous is the situation?
Well, at Fukushima, we had a tipping point that was reached within about a minute with the tsunami. Here in Nebraska, we have time. It's basically Fukushima in slow motion. The magic number is 1,014. When the water flood levels reach 1,014 feet, game over. It's all over. At that point, you're talking about flooding, short circuits, pumps, generators are out. But we're not there. And we don't expect that to be there anytime soon.
Now, our correspondent just now was saying that floodwaters are beginning to descend, so there's not such a fear in relation to Nebraska.
We dodged a bullet at the present time.
Okay, but what about the nuclear facility at Los Alamos? What kind of risks are there?
Well, that fire is
because I'm assuming there's a vast amount of nuclear waste being held at that plant.
The Los Alamos National Laboratory, the good news is we no longer store hydrogen and atomic bombs there. However, we have a particle accelerator, small reactors, and large quantities of nuclear waste involving plutonium, the most toxic chemical known to science. A microgram, you can't even see a microgram dust particle, in your lungs can cause lung cancer. And there are between 20,000 to 30,000 barrels, 55-gallon drums of plutonium waste stored on site.
That's horrendous then. So if that was in any way impacted by these conditions, there could be a serious outcome.
Well, remember that most of the nuclear sites at Los Alamos have been secured, okay? They've been locked down, so we know there's not going to be any danger from the accelerator, from the smaller reactors. The danger is areas that are not locked down. And what happens if the fire breaches the firewalls and goes right into the site itself? The fire is at the doorstep of Los Alamos right now. That's how close it is. And once the fire begins to spread into the building itself, it's a science experiment as to whether or not all our safety locks and redundancies will hold.
Would you recommend moving the nuclear waste to somewhere else? Is that possible?
It's
to
not
perhaps a less endangered area?
It's not possible now in the sense that people are scrambling to evacuate people off site, to secure these sites. Basically, it's not possible given the chaos of the present moment because it's not under control by any means.
Do you think that we should change the circumstances in which we hold this kind of nuclear waste? Do you think that there should be some new plans, new rules of some kind that mean a fire doesn't come up to the gates of Los Alamos in the way that this has?
It's an accident waiting to happen. 11 years ago, we even had a bigger fire at Los Alamos. This is now Act 2 in this game. And in 2009, the Department of Energy issued a scathing report stating that local fire crews are not trained to handle a situation with sophisticated equipment, nuclear weapons parts, and plutonium. They're simply outgunned by the sophisticated equipment.
So what should we do?
I think we should begin to think about moving some of these sites away from Los Alamos and realize that the whole purpose of Los Alamos is stockpile stewardship. That is to maintain our nuclear stockpile. And at the present time, it could be unstable, especially in areas with forest fires.
Dr. Michio Kaku, thanks so much for joining us. Next.